So my name is Dave West. I run Scrum.org for Ken Schwaber. Some of you may have heard of Scrum. We have a little booth out there. There's some professional Scrum trainers here, professional Scrum Master, etc. Written a few books myself with some co-authors. Unfortunately, the Head First Object-Oriented Analysis and Design, one book that I've wrote, my granny describes it as the best book she's ever owned to kill spiders. So if you need a book to kill spiders, it's white, clean, and very heavy. I think that's the characteristics. And my co-presenter here is Jeff, who some of you may know, very famous bald guy.
Yeah. Absolutely. A reform designer, these days working as a coach and a consultant with mostly large enterprise teams in Europe and the US primarily, helping them kind of bring a more customer-centric, evidence-based way of working to their practices.
Cool. So we saw Kat earlier sort of said this, but I'm just going to spend like 10 seconds, no, probably longer, but a little bit of time, just setting the scene as to why we're on stage together, UX sort of design kind of guru, guy that talks about process, kind of, formerly the rough product manager, sort of Forrester analyst. I know I don't admit that in company usually, but why are we together? And ultimately the change that Kat talked about. Now, there's a couple of places I would go if I was you thinking about this change, trying to sort of provide a mental model, trying to create an abstraction around it. One is this guy, Thomas Friedman, you may have read his book, The World is Flat. Another great book that he wrote is That Used to Be Us, that talks about the demise of the United States of America, which is kind of a bit depressing, so please don't read that. And then his latest book is Thank You for Being Late, and he talks about the fact we've entered a sort of like a supernova driven by three forces. Globalization, the sort of like the world is flat, the fact your car has been to more places than you have, the components have anyway, and they're assembled somewhere else. The fact that we are climate change, which is, or population change, which is related to that, is fundamentally changing. And of course, Moore's Law ++, this sort of exponential growth in computing power. Another person that writes about this change is Acolina Perez, who actually is not actually, she lives actually quite close to here. She's at LSE, she's Venezuelan, she's an economist. She talks about these ages. Now, Kat talked about how long the agricultural age lasted, maybe, but in recent times, we've seen these 5 ages, and from the Industrial Revolution, the age of steam, etc. We're in the middle of the most tricky time as we transition from mass production and oil to the digital age, or as she calls it, something slightly different, which is CET or whatever. So we're in this sort of change. This world is changing, and it means that we're in this world not of scarcity, which is what mass production is based on, but opportunity. And Kat kind of talked about this as well. We've got all these different things floating around. We can do absolutely anything. Scrum.org is a website that's visited by over 10 million people a year, and it's cost me $1,200 a month running on AWS. And it's as fast in India, or Alaska, not that I've been there, but Alaska, than it is in London, than it is in the US. And it's thousands of transactions, it's just amazing, and it's $1,200 a year running on AWS with a few containers, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Really, really easy what we can do today. But unfortunately, not everything is an opportunity, and that's really where this sort of UX stuff and some of the design thinking and fabulous book, Lean UX and Sense and Respond, 2 books, really start talking about it. You've got this magic product box, right? You can wiggle your business model, you can wiggle your channel, you can change the dial architecture, you can fundamentally change the customer, what you're working with, the experience that customer has, how it engages with the network, etc., and the features that you deliver to that person. But ultimately, what we see is that doesn't necessarily work always. There's lots and lots of examples, Boeing, maybe at the moment, that have delivered something that doesn't necessarily deliver on this. You've got desirable, feasible, viable, and also appropriate for the context of your organisation, its mission, its sort of behaviour, who it is as its brand equity, etc. So not everything is an opportunity. So it means that we live in this world, right? This happens to be Stacey, Ralph Stacey's graph. You could have equally put in, the Cynefin graph as well. But ultimately, we're in this sort of like world of the complex. The simple work is going away. This is a great example is I have 2 small children, 1 6, 1 3, and my wife was away in Miami in a girls' weekend or some such shenanigans. And I don't want to know what she was. But anyway, she came back, that was a good moment. Anyway, and a surprise to everybody. So she goes away. So of course, Friday night, I've got the boys. Chaos is reigning, as you can imagine. 2 small boys. Daddy doesn't know what the hell's going on, so he does what any good father does. He goes to McDonald's. Now, how do you know that McDonald's is a bit of a nightmare with 2 small children if there's a line? Lines are not good for children. Children are a bit like, I don't know, Europeans. They don't understand, or if you've been skied in the Alps, they don't believe in lines, you know? They sort of whiz around them, and there's like suddenly Harry's over. George, of course, wants to go to the bathroom. Chaos. So, what do now? I order it all online. I literally know exactly. I go in and I pick it up. The 2 Happy Meals, and obviously 2 Happy Meals, a large Diet Coke and a spliff. And that you have to get outside. Anyway, you sit down and eat it. No kids running around. Oh my God. So complicated work has been replaced by an app. I don't even talk to the McDonald's person. I don't even see, well, I do see one. There's one in the distance looking, selling spliffs. No, but but the point is that we're in this very different world now. Complex work is the norm. That's a different world. So of course, Scrum, we all know Scrum. Scrum's, I know nobody talks about Scrum anymore, it's just called Agile, sorry. But Scrum, because it's not cool, but Scrum exists on 3 very simple concepts to deal with this: empiricism, self-organization, continuous improvement. That's everything else. The Scrum life cycle is not a release cycle, it's a planning cycle. Very important. The 3 roles are all about providing some responsibilities and that sort of tension around understanding things empirically, defining hypotheses, executing those hypotheses, and continuously learning in some sort of continuously improving life cycle in an organized team that self-organizes around the problem, almost has enough skills to solve it. That's Scrum. That's what we were designed for. That's what we're all about. Now, what's interesting is that Scrum and UX, design sprints, etc., have sort of been opposed in many talks. And we need to do all this design. Design's different. We have to understand the customer. Scrum's about development. And I didn't like that. I found that really, really made me feel a bit unwell. So that's when we started talking. So tell me a little about Lean UX and UX.
Yeah, so the interesting is my path kind of, it's interesting that we ended up in the same place because my path started from a different point of view. So I started off as a designer, as an information architect, as a UX designer, an interaction designer, and for the first 10 years of my career, I was in the deliverables business. My job was I was working in waterfall shops. Agile was a thing, but not much of a thing at that point. And I was working in waterfall shops, and the output of my work was documentation. That's what I created: wireframes, spec documents, that type of thing. On a good day, and this is the kind of work that I was doing. The majority of the stuff, maybe not the visual design stuff, but most of that work up there. At the end of the day, on a good day, right, after I finished all my specifications in my design phase, and I would hand that over to the developers in the development phase, on a good day, 50% of my work would get implemented. It was a good day, right? Which means that on a good day, half of my work was being thrown away, which was soul crushing to me. It felt like a colossal waste of my time. And really, I hit an inflection point 10 years into my career to say, if this is going to be the next 10 years, I'm done. I'm leaving, I'm not going to do this anymore, because I literally, most days, it was more than half of my work that was getting thrown away. There had to be a better way. Now, coincidentally, right around that same time, this was about 12 years ago, I found myself in a leadership position, leading a design team in New York for a company called The Ladders. Now, The Ladders was about a 400-person company, high-growth startup, doing particularly well at that time. And the engineering organization at that company was transitioning towards working in an agile way. So Scrum, a combination of XP and Scrum, and a bunch of other ways. And they were just doing it, right? The engineers were just starting to do it. I had shown up, and I was building a design team that was doing all of this stuff that you're seeing on the screen right here. And my job was not only to build that team, but to now make that team successful in an agile software engineering environment. Now, this is 12 years ago, so 2007, if you think about it. In 2007, if you Googled Scrum and UX, and Agile and UX, it was a list of articles about how terrible these two things are together. It was a trail of tears, really, is what it was. these things don't go together, Agile sucks, design has no business being in there, design sucks, right? Like most of those things. And there was no good advice about how to do this. There were a couple of companies that were talking about doing it, but nothing particularly good. The only kind of positive piece of content that was available back then was Desiree C. and Lynn Miller's piece on staggered sprints, which was unfortunately misunderstood as midi waterfalls, basically, and that's an unfortunate thing. And so I find myself in this position, leading a design team in an organization that's transitioning into an agile way of working, and I had an opportunity. The opportunity was that I had a good boss, and that boss gave me the space to experiment with process. Me and my team and our colleagues in engineering and product management to experiment with process. And where we ended up at the end of multiple iterations and experiments and process was here. The stories that you read about in the book Lean UX stem almost exclusively from that initial experience, right? It was about solving that problem for us at the Ladders. It worked for us. And what we found was that a different type of collaboration was needed to build the kinds of modern software, digital product experiences that were successful, that respected these new methods of software engineering, and that delivered customer value in a time frame that made sense in a world that was becoming increasingly continuous. Right? That was the other thing that we were dealing with as well, was, I mean, think about it, 20 years ago when I started working, software came in a box. Right? You went to the store and you bought a box of software. And if you think about it, we were using model years as still as a kind of the marketing gimmick for software. Yeah. Windows 95, Windows 98, Windows 2000, and right? Every year you have to buy the next box of software. And as that model was going away, certainly in the last 5 to 10 years, right? How do we build the kind of collaborative structures that allow design, engineering, ultimately product management to interact in a way that made sense to the modern nature of software and technology and delivered not only customer value, but delivered great experiences at the same time. So the stories that we tell in this book, the lessons learned in this book, come from figuring out how to do that and then teaching it and helping other teams build it into the ways that they work. And what's interesting is the conversation that we've been having over the last year and a half or so has come. Did you do it?
Sorry, I did it.
You did it already?
I thought you were doing that. Were you just pointing at me?
No. That's a good one. But it starts to get this conversation here, which is, okay, we've got Scrum, right, which is designed for self-organizing teams, empiricism, and continuous improvement, right?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. We'll show in just a second how user experience and design is really targeted at the same thing. And so the conversation that we've been having has led to these kinds of discussions. If we take all of the activities that user experience and design currently practice today, can we mesh them into a way of working? Let's not call it a process or a recipe, but can we mesh them into a way of working that solves for all of those challenges that I just talked about before? This is a static attempt. This is a snapshot of the end of a whiteboarding session that I did by myself, frankly. And in a way to start to have this conversation, I put it online and we began to drive this global conversation about how to bring these two things together. Now, the most interesting thing about this, and this is kind of where we're headed in all of this, is that these two ideas, when you break down the core principles for Scrum and UX, they're just not that different. Right?
No. And that's the sort of the motivation, which has now come out. We've been working together. There's been a class, etc., bill, assessment, all that kind of malarkey. But that was the motivation. We realized. So I read Lean UX, and I loved it. I then went Sense and Respond, awesome. And I realized that these designers, because I was so annoyed by this Google sort of design sprint, this sort of separate set of people that wear nice clothes and are usually attractive, and they bring artifacts and deliver it to us, and I'm the unattractive group over here, and I was like, no! And I was also worried about diversity, what Kat was talking about. I was worried that the solutions we were building were missing something, because designers actually have they contribute, they're not just attractive. They also contribute some fabulous ideas, But it's not a linear set of ideas. It's not like you write them down and then that's it. It's this more of a, hey, you're doing that, what about this? And oh, what about that? And sprints are all about that collaboration. So that motivated this conversation, and I'm hoping that it's going to build bridges between these communities to deliver valuable software that will change the world. That's what I hope at Scrum Develop.
And if you look at these, right, in theory, right, these two things should be compatible, right? There's a focus on value, there's a focus on customer centricity, there's a focus on continuous improvement, iteration, right, design. Unless you're making art, right, design isn't static, it's an iterative thing that continues to evolve, especially given the modern nature of technology where we can learn literally as fast as we want whether the thing that we put in our customers' hands makes sense and delivers value to them. And yet,
yeah, there's some challenges, right? So when we started doing this, guess what? We have a very strong and active, opinionated Scrum community. They started lambasting the idea, what about the definition of done? How do you get a sprint goal? What happens if, a lot of edge cases, what happens if you do a sprint and you actually don't, all you deliver is learning and understanding and this stupid customer stuff? I mean, the horror of it. All I've done is learn more that has allowed me to build fabulous software that delivers value. Damn that! Let's build software. I mean, Kat almost said it as well. She was like, the business were coming to her and saying, oh, can you give us some ideas? And I'm like, let's write some code. You know, so we had all of these points started, you know, the designers were saying, well, no, my art is, I'm a specialist, I'm amazing. You know, so we had these different sort of questions posed. So now I think we should move to that section of the talk, and you can help us do this. I'm going to swap. And this is an amazing sort of experience. Let's try this. And then go full screen. Look at me. I'm a product owner that can use a computer. Don't let that happen again. So these are some of the questions. Oh, look.
No.
Oh.
I think you pop out a presentation.
Oh, they're not there? Oh, that's, see, product owner can't do that. I was seeing them fine. Let me just, that just sums it up, really, doesn't it? Why is it not? Oh, here we go. Now I just go that. Hang on, we're coming. It's coming. So now we should be this. Now if I do this, we didn't test this, you see. We believed what Steve said, that testing's dead.
There it is.
There we go, look at that! So I saw this a minute ago, it was brilliant, and it's brilliant now. So here's some questions. You can add them now, you can even say them, and that's a ridiculous idea. But we'll try to address some of them. What do you think? Is this cool? Will this be fun? What do you think, Jeff?
I think, yes.
Okay, which one shall we start first?
Let's start at the top.
Okay, how many teams can a single UX, that's not a non-married UX person, but a single, let's say single human being, they may be single as well, UX person, like the fact we said person, support?
Yeah, and there's really two questions here, right? There's a question of how many teams can a UX person support, and how many teams should a UX person support. So let's talk about the ideal first, and then let's talk about reality second, right? So the ideal situation is one, in my opinion. A UX person, a UX designer supports one team. They're dedicated full-time to that team. They're a full-time member of that team. Why? Why? Because that cross-functional collaboration builds a shared language. It builds a shared understanding. It builds alignment and vision across the team. There is no dependency on that designer when they go and deal with another team. We don't have the context switching costs of I have to go work over here, then I have to come over here. And there's a tremendous benefit to the efficiency and the productivity of the teams as they work together closely on the same thing every day. It's just a greater and there's a higher level of trust as well that I've seen between teams. And I've seen this firsthand. I mean, that's the ideal state. The reality, sorry guys.
I was going to just add a little bit of that, but that means a few things before we talk about reality.
Yeah.
It means that they're a development member. So that sometimes means that when push comes to shove, they may have to do other stuff that's not design. I know, I don't like that idea, right? They don't. You know, they have to get their turtleneck dirty. And sorry, this is early unfair. Some of them wear polo nets. No, but the point is that they have to get their hands dirty sometimes. Because the team, maybe it's the middle of a sprint, maybe there's some sort of testing that needs to be done. Like, oh my God, we can't get this done. Let's work on it, let's scrum and actually work on it. And suddenly, can you help, Jeff? And that's actually great. Even though you may think it's not. Waste of resource, I'm brilliant, I should be just doing this. It's actually great for one very important reason. They learn some stuff from a different perspective. It makes a bit more diverse their understanding of the problem. Writing tests makes them realise, working with a tester and the team and everybody's, makes them realise some really interesting stuff. But it does challenge some of those specialist role kind of ideas. Sorry.
That's okay. But in reality, I can't recall that I've seen an organization in recent memory that has employed enough designers to support every single customer-facing or human-facing Scrum team or development team. And so the reality is that there's always a situation where there are more teams than there are designers. In that reality, just based on my personal experience, I think the best case scenario that I've seen is for designers to support 2 teams at most. I think anything beyond that really starts to get a bit unwieldy. And the best way that I've seen designers support more than one team is that they have a primary team. It's the team where they go through all the ceremonies, they attend all the stand-ups, all the retrospectives, and so forth. And then they support that secondary team in some kind of a lesser involved way, which again, it's the suboptimal experience for that second team. Maybe they're supporting them with office hours, for example. So every Tuesday and Thursday, between 3 and 5, I'm at my desk, I'm available to this team and maybe another team as UX support. The challenge, right? As soon as you put anybody, a designer, certainly could be an engineer or a product owner, as soon as you put anybody in a position where they're supporting, let's just say 3 teams every day, what you've done is you've put that individual in a position where they come into work every day and they have to decide which 2 teams am I going to piss off today, right? Because they can only work on one thing at a time, which means that if they've got 3 P1 priorities, which 2 P1s am I going to ignore today, right? And that's not a position we want to put our colleagues in.
Just to add a little bit around that, the role changes somewhat when you're supporting multiple teams. It's not about you doing all the work anymore as a designer. It's about you helping other people to do the work. It's about sharing the skills, not hoarding those skills. Yes, you're an amazing designer, but how about you help somebody? I know it's not going to be as good as if you did it. It's not going to be as awesome, but it's better than not doing it, and I'm only available, because then you start to build, not only do you start to build some empathy with the role and the responsibilities and encourage the organisation to maybe hire more designers, but it also, more importantly, provides you some flexibility around those teams. So you end up with designers whose responsibility isn't just to do design, it's to help others do design. You teach many people to fish. Yes, they're not as good as you at fishing, but ultimately, over time, maybe you get some improvements at least.
And they see how hard design is as well, which is
Which is awesome, because then they do hire designers, which is really, really, really good. Right. Does that answer that question? Does that make sense? I think it does. And I think the diversity thing is so important as well. I think teams that have this set of skills and these people from a different point of view, you build fabulous things. The next question is, can UX work be planned into the same sprints as dev work for the same feature? It's a bit of a tricky one, isn't it?
It is. I have to start with it. Short answer is yes.
You good?
Yes,
moving on. Yes, why would you not, is the short answer. I suppose maybe it's talking about this sort of staggered sprint malarkey.
Yeah, so the unfortunate thing about staggered sprints, and I'm sure we'll get into a dual track conversation before we run out of time, if not, we can talk about it afterwards as well. But the staggered sprint challenge is that it was misunderstood as 2 types of work being done by 2 types of people, right, kind of being handed off. So if you look at that diagram, sadly, it looks like mini waterfalls, even that staggered sprint diagram. In this particular case, we absolutely need to plan what the experience is of using a particular feature is. And that experience is dependent on engineering, it's dependent on performance, it's dependent on the quality of the code, and the user interface, the interaction design, the copywriting, and all of those things. Now, some of those things may be easier to plan than others. Some of those things may be more difficult to execute, but ultimately there are dependencies between those two things that if a team doesn't talk about them up front, how do we expect this thing to work? Right? How will this integrate into our experience? What's the level of quality that we'd like to see in this particular customer experience? Right? If we don't talk about that, then we end up, again, in this staggered sprint. Well, I made the design, okay, well, let's go implement it. Oh, but it doesn't work the way that we thought about, and then this thing drags on from sprint to sprint to sprint. And so, in my experience, it's been extremely beneficial for teams to talk about an experience, right? Let's call it a workflow, as a cross-functional team. Again, to really understand both the technical and the experience dependencies, and then determine how best to tackle that as a group.
And what's interesting, though, is the other thing that it does, which as an ex-software engineer, I guess, as a recovering software engineer, I would hate to think. Sometimes it means you do things that are economically cheaper than writing code. I don't believe it either. But it's possible that you may do a survey, ask a question, have an interview, build a mock-up. You know, these sort of things that sometimes challenge the fact that I just want to write the system completely, do the databases and the design and get the end tier and build those services. This challenges that because ultimately you identify, hopefully your backlog is written in terms of outcomes that you seek. Hopefully those outcomes are measurable. And hopefully you then can say, oh, well, what's the minimal experiment we can do to make sure that we build the right thing? And designers have got fabulous ideas to help you do that. And then by working in partnership, and maybe you build a little bit of the architecture to see how the things would fit together. Maybe we've got some constraints around the type of GUI libraries we're going to be using. Maybe we've got some constraints around data. Maybe we've got some constraints around engagement with it. And we can start experimenting with some of that from a technology point of view, call it a SPI, call it whatever. And at the same time as doing those customer-facing things, and then ultimately you end up building the thing. And remember, you've got the sprint. It's only, you're not like spending forever doing it. You've got 2 weeks, or a week, or whatever the sprint length is, and you'll come back and go, hang on a minute, how did that go? What did we learn? Well, actually, it was just, we didn't get the interact, we didn't get that. It'd be easy just to build it, whatever the outcome is.
Absolutely. Absolutely, and there's situations too where a design might ask for a complicated interaction model or some kind of a workflow, and rightfully so, the engineering team might ask, well, do we really have to build it this way because that's going to take us this much longer? And the answer, we don't know, let's find out, is a good conversation to have, again, to plan that within the same sprint as well.
Okay. There's a good one that's got 5 little thumbs up. People are using the software. How cool is that? What do you do for design work that takes longer than a sprint? Oh my God! What happens if work requires it's bigger? Right? What do we do?
Extend that work over multiple sprints.
No.
Yes.
I don't. We just extend the length of the sprint.
No, but look, I think being a little facetious. No, but this one becomes really interesting. So we think of things like experiments or research activities that you can't wrap up in a week, right? Maybe there's a study that takes 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, maybe even longer to do that. Maybe the findings of an experiment take longer to come back before you can actually act on them. Maybe there is something that requires an additional level of expertise that we don't have on the team, or that the person who joins the team for that time simply takes longer than the sprint length to do that. I think that's okay. I don't have any brilliant response to this other than I believe work can span multiple sprints, and at the end of the sprint, we pause to understand what we've done, what needs to happen next, and how that's going to affect the work that the team has to do in the following sprint.
And this is an interesting tension. So I was being a little facetious, but this is a good tension. Because ultimately, yes, I mean, software, building big software, Tesla, for instance, takes longer than a sprint to build that, right? You break it down to the smallest possible thing. You think, how far can we get? What is that definition of done to deliver that thing in that sprint? And then there's no reason why information can't feed back, say there's a study. So you design the study in one sprint and you let it go. And then in a month's time, you bring that back in that sprint, whatever you're in, and you review that information in that context. It becomes into your sprint review and it becomes part of that. There's no reason why you can't do these things. However, you have to be wary. Remember that we're not just sort of like breaking. The sprint is not an well, it is an artificial, but it's a construct for planning. It allows us to review. We really strive for trying to get as much complete stuff possibly in that time box. So don't end up saying, yeah, have that never-ending story or issue or backlog item or PBI that lives on sprint after sprint after sprint. Try to break that into something that you can do in that sprint. Design the study is a great example. Build the first version of the study, which you'll test with 500 people or whatever. You know, whatever, you break things down to the smallest possible unit so that you can effectively use the sprint for what it's meant to be, which is this time box sort of like inspection and adaptation opportunity based on real empirical data. So, and my experience is there's nothing you can't break down in some way, shape or form. Which is cool. What else have we got? This is funky, isn't it? Look at this. Oh, 6 votes. Oh yeah, they got that. That's 6. How many US? Oh, we've done that. 5. What design work takes like doing that? 3. Why is working as a sprint ahead bad? Did we talk about this? We kind of did a little.
We touched on it a little bit with the staggered sprint model, but it's worth touching on very, very briefly, I think, one more time. Again, I think working a sprint ahead breaks the shared understanding model, generally speaking, right? You've got designers working in a vacuum by themselves, making decisions without a lot of input from their colleagues in product management and in engineering. They're making those assumptions. They're building artifacts. They're spending time building artifacts because they need to communicate that work to engineers at the end of that sprint that they've worked ahead. So at which point, as soon as we've done that, we've broken that shared understanding model. We're back making deliverables, and then we have to then convince our colleagues in engineering that they need to build the thing that we just designed, right? And that's a lengthy conversation. And it's not a fun conversation in most cases, because then the conversation, well, what can we fit in the sprint? Right? We've got 2 more weeks. We can't possibly fit all the things that you just designed in that last sprint, right? And so that creates waste. Design work ends up on the cutting room floor. Egos take a hit. Morale takes a hit. And we're basically back to a waterfall. It might be smaller waterfalls, but that's ultimately where we end up.
Yeah, that disconnection between the 2 groups becomes, it's sort of, one of 2 things happen. Either you end up with this very confrontational environment, or a very passive one, which I see as well, where the designer comes along and says, hey, this is the design, guys. I've spent the last 2 weeks doing it. It's brilliant. Here it is. And then the developers go, yeah, all right. And then it doesn't work. And the developers say, your fault. And it isn't. Scrum is all about ownership, accountability, right? The dev team is responsible for the thing that they deliver. The product owner is responsible for ensuring that thing delivers value. Ownership is crucial because as we've proven, it's very motivating. It's like when you hand code off to operations. It's like back in the day when we used, before DevOps and before those ideas, that sort of like demarcation of response, well, it works on my machine, God. Obviously it's you idiots in operations, you can't run it properly. That sort of idea is perpetuated in this situation. So it's almost worse when the team doesn't argue back. It's almost worse when even though it's much nicer for the designer and a lot less stressful, so that breaks that. So it's ideally, let's work together as a cross-functional team. Cool. Agreed, as it were. Definition of done, that's a complicated thing. That's a scrummy thing, right? This definition of done that clearly defines all of the things that need to be in place for this thing to be potentially shippable, right? So, does it change? Well, no, if you're shipping things, it does not change. You still have a definition of done that is there and it manifests itself. What's interesting, though, is it's very important that the essence of that idea is very important for all PBIs. Not all product backlog items, not all stories, not all things go through that definition done. There's some of them, particularly in your sprint backlog, are sort of work items, tasks, etc. But it's very important to have acceptance criteria on it. It's very important to know when that individual item is done, right? So that means that the things that we're doing as designers, that we're breaking up into that chunk with the team, need to also have that acceptance criteria clearly articulated. And that's actually and that's a thing designers find, oh my God, we've got 2 weeks, what can we do? Let's define exactly the outcomes we're seeking, let's break it down, let's get that acceptance criteria. So, though it's, definition of done doesn't necessarily change on a Scrum team, what we're doing is we're taking that idea, we're making it manifest to any items that we're working on across.
When I work with teams, this is the pivot point around which agility kind of takes hold. If teams get this right, this conversation right, this definition of done, this definition of validated, this definition of value, ultimately right, that's where agility really starts to take hold. Not agile necessarily capital A, but agility takes hold. The way that I teach teams to work is to focus on outcomes, very specifically outcomes. Now, outcomes are measurable changes in customer behavior, or user behavior. We're looking for people to behave differently. So just because you built it correctly with 0 bugs and it does the thing that you expect it to do, what happened when you put it in the customer's hands, right? And what is our expectation versus what's our expectation of what customers will do when they have it in their hands, right? The question that I always force teams to ask themselves, and because they rarely do this, which I find fascinating because it feels so obvious to me, is what will people be doing differently if you did a good job, right? And it's not a question I ask designers or engineers or product owners, it's the team, right? The cross-functional team is if you write the best code, if you design the best design, you write the best copy, and people totally get it, what will they be doing differently at the end of this process? And they'll say, well, they'll buy stuff from us in a shorter amount of time. They'll tell their friends about the wonderful experience. We'll get more mortgage applications through the website rather than in person at the bank. Whatever it is, right? But if you listen to everything that I just said there, none of those things are necessarily features or capabilities. They are changes in customer behavior. They're outcomes. And so while the definition of done for a feature could be works as designed, right, meets a specific set of acceptance criteria, the definition of validated or adds value is, did you actually change customer behavior for the better? And what's nice about that is that it forces that cross-functional collaboration, and it starts to do away with a little bit of that blame game as well. Well, you guys didn't write good enough code, or your design sucked, or whatever it is, right? It doesn't matter, right? Even if we designed it in the best possible way and you wrote the best possible code, if customers couldn't get through the process more efficiently, then we all failed, right? So the feature's done, terrific, people can't use it, right? Or we can't make them more successful.
I just have to, this is probably one of the most important learnings that I got from engaging with Jeff and Josh and this and attending the class, was that it's outcomes, not outputs. And I know that sounds very like, oh, of course it is, why would you not think that? I'm meant to be the agile guy, right? I've delivered lots of products, some of them people have used, not many. But the point is, that I'm meant to be this product manager, owner, whatever, that gets all this stuff. But I sometimes forget that. I concentrate so much on the work that I forget the outcome. And one message that's very strong in Lean UX, and should be stronger in Scrum, honestly, and we sort of write about the mechanics, and the approach and the ideas, we don't write about the outcomes enough, and I would like to change that, and I'm hoping we are, is about these outcomes. And it's really hard though, I try because we run Scrum in Scrum, which you get cross-eyed after a while. Anyway, and I really try, and sometimes that's so hard. Because I'm like, I haven't actually thought this through. I just sort of know that I want to do it. Do I have to describe why and what the outcome's going to be? I just don't know.
And so we force the conversation at the beginning. Right? So we force that conversation at the beginning of an initiative or at the beginning of a sprint, right? I know you want to build stuff, but let's talk about why we want to build stuff, and let's talk about how we know we've actually built the right thing and done it well. And that ultimately, and again, this comes back to continuous improvement, comes back to empiricism, comes back to customer centricity. Because if we built something and designed it and it works really well and customers can't use it, let's learn why that is, and then let's go back and iterate on that. And to me, what I found, particularly with organizations who have shifted over the last decade or so from a waterfall mentality to any kind of agile process, most likely Scrum in most cases, is that going back and working on something it's unfathomable.
I know.
Right? We shipped it. It works as
We're
designed.
moving.
It's done.
Oh, no, that's good.
Right? It's done. Why would we
Passes
go
all the
back?
tests.
Right. It passes all the tests. Why would we go back and work on it again? And I think that and again, that's the outputs versus outcomes. If we're managing and measuring and rewarding for output, for done as in works as designed only, going back doesn't make any sense, right? But if we're measuring, managing, and incentivizing for outcomes, for those positive impacts on customer behavior, when we shipped it, it didn't positively impact customer behavior to the extent that is worthwhile, then we go back.
But
we have to go back.
It has huge, and I know time's coming, and I do want to get to the summary quickly, and I apologise for answering your question, but it has huge ramifications in your organisation. When it means teams need to be aligned to business outcomes and customers and products and always their projects kind of die a death on the vine. It means product owners need to start thinking not about projects that they're deriving through on this vision and stuff, but more about the outcomes that we're trying to seek and the value that we're trying to extract from our customers. That sounds awful, but you know what I mean. It means that we have to think as a team, everybody. I'm no longer just a software engineer. I'm now an insurance software engineer that cares about sharing risk. You know, it's got such massive ramifications on everything that we do. And even though it's just got 2 letters, UX or Scrum, I suppose that's what 7 letters, wasn't it? 6. But the important is an and, I guess, oh my God. But you know what I mean? So it's funny that this has got huge, scary implications across the whole organisation. And it's about this massive change from the age of mass production